Perry is a study from the social approach in 2015. However, before we begin, we need to go over a couple of pieces of background information. First, oxytocin will be used in this study, so it's important to know what it is. Oxytocin is a hormone that is believed to play a role in our social lives, from social bonding to trust and compassion. It particularly regulates the amygdala in our brains, which in past studies has been seen to affect the need for interpersonal distance. In this study, Perry is going to create the social salience hypothesis and test it. This hypothesis states that if oxytocin can increase our awareness of social cues, then it should have many different effects on interpersonal situations, as well as how one perceives social situations and reacts to them, depending on where they are. Therefore, social salience should have opposite effects on individuals facing certain situations, depending on their history and personality. This study will also measure empathy in participants, so it is important to understand what empathy is. Empathy is the way that someone reacts to what they see another person going through, which can affect the way that social cues are interpreted. There are 4 different ways to measure empathy: perspective taking, which is putting yourself into the shoes of another person; empathetic concern, which is the concern that you feel for another person; personal distress, which is the distress you feel for another person; and fantasy abilities, which is the ability to imagine what it must be like to be another person. Finally, the last bit of information that is necessary to know before we begin this study is that when it comes to distancing ourselves from others, there are 4 main spatial zones that we create, according to American anthropologist Edward T. Hall. From closest to farthest, the zones are the intimate zone, which is associated with family members or romantic lovers; the personal zone, which is where close friends interact; the social zone, which is the distance that a normal conversation will occur between strangers, coworkers, and friends; and the public zone, which is the distance that a public speaker would be associated with.
In Perry et al., Perry focuses on 3 different psychological topics: interpersonal distance, social hormones, and empathy. Interpersonal distance, commonly referred to as personal space, is the invisible boundary that we have around us that we do not want others invading. This is the reason why we feel uncomfortable in situations where someone stands too close to us. This boundary that surrounds you will get bigger or smaller, depending on what you are doing and who you are with. This concept is important because it can play a role in aspects of life, such as social anxiety, or having to stay farther from the people around you than usual, like during the COVID-19 pandemic and social distancing. It can also play a role in the way you experience life and deal with friendships and intimate relationships. Social hormones, like oxytocin, help us regulate and perceive our social interactions with other humans and mammals. Social hormones will give us positive feelings about our interactions with others and will help us decide which spatial zone we need to be talking to other people in. Empathy, as mentioned previously, is our ability to understand others, and it can be measured with a psychometric called the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, which is also known as the IRI. Here, you can see examples of possible questions that the IRI includes. You may remember taking this test earlier in the year on a Chromebook. In this image, you can see exactly what each question is testing for. Questions that have EC in parentheses means that those questions are used to rate the empathy of the tester. However, you may realize there are other letters too, with questions ending in PT, measuring perspective taking, questions ending in FS, measuring fantasy abilities, and questions ending in PD, measuring personal distress. While these 3 measures were not significant in the Perry study, they are characteristics that can be measured by the same IRI that measures empathy, which is what this study focuses on. Perry wants to investigate whether oxytocin will affect interpersonal distance in people who seem to have stronger empathetic skills.
Perry makes 2 different hypotheses about her study. The first hypothesis is that in the first part of the experiment, individuals with high levels of empathy will prefer closer interpersonal distances after they're given oxytocin, while individuals with lower levels of empathy will prefer further interpersonal distances after they are given oxytocin. Therefore, Perry believes that the administration of oxytocin will only intensify a person's preferred interpersonal distance. Her other hypothesis for the second part of the experiment is that the preferred distances and angles of the chairs, table, and plant in a picture will be affected by the administration of oxytocin and the differing levels of empathy in the participants. In this experiment, Perry recruited 54 male participants from an undergrad program at the University of Haifa in Israel. All the participants are 19 to 32 years old, with a mean age of 25 years old, with normal or corrected vision and no reported neurological or psychiatric disorders. For being in the experiment, they were all given either college course credit or payment. Something else Perry thought was important to know was that 5 of the participants were left-handed. It's also important to notice that the sampling technique used to get the participants is unknown.